It's your girl, your host, Jocelyn, and I am so grateful you are here. And I'm so grateful to be joined by James McCrae, who is a author, poet, creativity teacher, and spiritual meme artist and beyond, right? Because we are more than these labels that we create for ourselves out of comfort and clarity for humans. But thank you so much for being here, James. I really appreciate you. And I love the content that you share and the words you express. And I'm really excited to get into this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and grateful to speak to you. So thanks for having me on.
We are going to go ahead and begin our conversation by you sharing with us what it is that you feel grateful for.
I feel grateful for so much. I really think that gratitude is the most important emotion. So it's really hard to choose one thing. But right now, what comes to mind is gratitude for nature and the healing benefits of nature, whether that's the sunlight, the water, the smell of the trees and the flowers. And I've been doing a lot of biking around Austin lately and biking along the river and just spending more time just closer to source, which is nature. And it's a game changer. So right now that's bringing me so much gratitude.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, have you currently been in a season of like really connecting to nature that's like bringing up this gratitude for you? And you just confirmed that, yes, you've been spending more time with nature and you say that it's game changing. And I'm curious to ask, like, how has it been changing the game for you?
Yeah, I mean, well, I do live in a city, so it is, nature relatively speaking. I think, most cities you can find your spots, whether that's when I lived in New York City, and I would spend as much time as possible in Central Park or Prospect Park, or when I lived in Los Angeles, being in the ocean and on the hiking trails as much as possible. And here in Austin, there are parks and rivers and things like that. And what I what I learned since moving to Texas, because there's a really hot Texas sun here, and I have just learned just to love spending time in the sun, and watching the sunset. And people talk about light codes and, ancient civilizations would worship the sun. That was like the original god. And it's no surprise why that would be. It is, we have a lot of ideas of what God might be and these kind of abstract conceptions. But when you think about it, I mean, the sun really is literally the life giver to Earth. So it's at least a representation in the physical realm of whatever God or source energy actually is. So I really think that spending time in sunlight, you receive information just like subconsciously that comes through, and it's just very valuable and healing and feels so good on the skin. So I definitely recommend getting some sunlight, some
Yeah,
vitamin D.
yeah. And for me, like the relationship with the sun has been deepening. And I just want to share this since we're talking about the sun. Like recently, with the sun has really helped me really understand is unconditional love. I have had, other understandings, misunderstandings of what unconditional love is, but really looking at the sun and seeing how it shines the same on me when I'm in a dark season and the same when I'm in a light season, or on my neighbor who's upset and me when I'm joyful. Like it shines the same on all of us. It shines no differently for you than it does for me or any other part of the world. And even if when, we decide to not receive the light of the sun, it's still continuing to shine anyways. So just kind of like having all these reflections of like how the sun is just so powerful and so giving and so unconditional is like really helped me reprogram my understanding of what unconditional love is.
Totally. I've got a little poem in my new book that I don't remember the exact wording, but it's something along the lines of, wanting to shine as freely as the sun, which has no prejudice or judgment to where it casts its light. It shines equally on all things
Mm-hmm.
without judgment or resistance or withholding.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a beautiful lesson there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I One of my beliefs is that part of the purpose in this life is to develop our soul. Like we're here for soul development. That's one of my current beliefs. And we will come across cycles that contain certain lessons. And if we don't learn those lessons, we'll repeat the cycles. And who we are in this lifetime, like you is James. Like James has some specific lessons carried within him that is meant to assist the soul that you have. And me, Jocelyn, is carrying some certain lessons through my personality and my experiences. And I'm, first of all, curious if you share somewhat of the same belief. And two, I'd like to ask you what you feel you're meant to learn in this lifetime, which I know is a big question, but from what you've understood so far in reflecting on your life, have there been any lessons that really have been sticking out to you? Like, this is what I'm meant to learn in this life.
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's just really important to have that belief, right? And that's it's tapping into the ultimate existential question about existence and whether there's a meaning and purpose to existence or not. And there's a lot of debate over that question. Personally, I think it's a little silly to think that there's not a purpose. Like the, the conspiracy of randomness is a little far-fetched for me to buy into. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit too perfect.
Yeah.
The intricacy of the design is a little too perfect. On every level, from the minutia and the, you know, atoms and protons and neutrons to the physical world of nature and the sun and the ocean to the Fibonacci sequence that's encoded into nature, including the human body. It's all a miracle. It's all magic. And I think it's just a disempowering trick for us to believe that it's not. So I definitely believe there is some kind of a purpose, what that is, where we come from, all of that. It's really hard to say with certainty. Like I try not to put too specific of a definition on it, because I think when you try to define purpose and just the nature of the universe too specifically, then you're going to get into trouble. That's when you're going to get into dogma. And it's like, you can't define it with human language in a specific term. Like, oh, we come from heaven, it's the wheel of samsara.
Mm-hmm.
We're programmed into a simulation. Like, these are all just metaphors to describe the nature of reality, but they're just metaphors. And I think it's a little foolish to try to define it too
Yeah.
strictly.
Yeah. That really quickly, it reminds me of this saying that goes, when you try to name it, you can't find it. And when you find it, you can't name it.
Totally. And it's like one of the first, in the first page of the Tao Te Ching, it says the Tao that can be named is not the true Tao. Because then once you define something with human language, you're applying limitations to what that is, because language is inherently limiting. So certainly, in terms of what I am learning in this incarnation. I mean, it's so hard to say in the moment, because you often don't really you need kind of perspective to see. I definitely think that I often feel a little bit uncomfortable in human society, and I don't think I'm alone in that feeling. um so that's part of the lesson, is how we can. I think there's lessons just inherently in the limitations that we're living in. That's the limitations of the body, the limitations of the laws of our society, the limitations of interpersonal relationships. There's a lot of boundaries and borders and restrictions and limitations that restrain us, um, in the 3D world, and that's what makes life frustrating. But I really think that is just the lesson in and of itself. Like, the purpose of our limitations and our struggle is to expand, is to trigger our expansion. You know, pressure creates diamonds.
Mhm.
Or it's just like, if you're playing a game, there's rules in the game, and those rules limit you by definition, but they're what make the game worth playing. They're what give the game a structure. So, whether we're all just playing here, and I like maybe there's a purpose that we're like, really, the soul needs to learn to get to the next level. That that
Mhm.
that that could be the case. It could just be the case of we're here to play an experience.
Mhm.
The experience itself could be the purpose. Like, I love one thing that Alan Watts said about life being, essentially God playing hide and seek with itself.
Mhm.
Like, we're all like little aspects of God that have been broken up and scattered around, the world. And the purpose is to remember that we are aspects of God, and to return to that unity. So we might have individual purposes, and I think we have collective purposes as well, in terms of waking up and returning to that unity consciousness from which we came.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the goal of humanity.
Mhm. Yeah. That concept of like hide and seek reminds me of this other saying where it's like, if God were to choose to hide somewhere, it would choose to hide in human, because that's the last place that the human would look, is like finding the God within the self. So I like that concept and this saying that I'm sharing with you, because I feel like the spiritual awakening, the spiritual journey is to realize that it's not this far outward concept or person or thing that's outside of us, but is within us and within all and all living beings. So thank you for sharing all of that. And another thing I want to touch on is you sharing with us about, like, identities and how identities are limitations. That's something that I really have been reflecting on a lot recently. And I feel like because there are these very visible limitations in the 3D world, and because we do identify so much with the 3D world, we identify with the limitations that we see. And that said, there's a lot of self-imposed limitations with our identities. And I'm curious to ask you, what are some self-imposed limitations that you've worked through?
Yeah, wow. Well, first of all, yeah, someone told me something interesting recently. There was like this intuitive psychic man that just approached me at a party and started giving me like crazy downloads. And one thing he said, which isn't unique to me, but I think is unique to all of us, is that we are multidimensional. So the human brain is experiencing 3D reality because that's the level of consciousness that the brain is tuned into. But simultaneously, just parallel to this the human 3D experience, our soul is living in another dimension with different limitations. And I think it's possible that we exist in multiple dimensions at the same time. And the ego is experiencing this one because this is the one that we are, the antenna of the ego and the brain is attuned to. So we think this is all it is, but really like the soul is existing on another level. And it's like we're multidimensional beings on multiple planes simultaneously. So even those illusions that appear to be very defined, they're only just an aspect of the overall experience of the soul. In terms of my own identity and what I've worked through, I mean, so much. I think it's so important to go through multiple deaths and rebirths throughout your life. You know, every few years, I think it's important to, you know, shed the old skin of your identity and find out what's underneath. And I don't know, I think you can kind of see that in people's eyes. Like some people just like you can just see like maybe they just haven't grown enough. They haven't let go of their like old identity from childhood or from, you know, being a young adult.
Mm-hmm.
So like I mean, I've gone through, you know, first of all, I was raised very much like in the Christian tradition. So that's one identity that I let go of
Mm-hmm.
a long time ago. Um, I've been a corporate professional in advertising and really, you know, had an identity of myself around that, which I had to work through. When my first book came out, Shit Your Ego Says, which was published by Hay House, I had a bit of an identity of being a self-help author, right? And a spiritual person. And even that is something that I had to kind of shed and let go of to find out that I was really an artist the whole time. So I've gone through a lot of different identities, and um, I think that at the bottom of all of our identities is just that it's like a playful, creative, imaginative spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So I almost get more and more like my childhood self every time I peel away a layer of my identity. And I'm sure I've got identity stuff right now that I'll eventually outgrow, right? Like there's probably going to be a time when I look back and I think, wow, remember that phase where I just made a ton of memes? That was wild, right? So like I think it's so important to there's this great lyric from the band Wilco where they say you've got to learn how to die if you want to be alive. I just think that's so important to shed your old identity and you know, tap more and more into, you know, what's underneath all of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it also reminds me of this saying that says, you have to let go of who you think you are in order for you to become who you truly are.
Totally.
Yeah. And, you know, speaking on like these letting go of identities and these experiences of continuous deaths and rebirths is something that you sound very comfortable with, you know, that you understand and that, you know, you probably could recognize within yourself, like, okay, I'm going through shedding, I'm going to go through this rebirth. But I feel like when we first experience these experiences, it's very disassociating. Did you experience that, and how were those initial like very difficult deaths and rebirths for you?
Well, it's painful. All change is painful. I think that it's like an ego death. Like the ego suffers because the ego is what has an identity around a certain thing. And when that starts to break apart, the ego sees it as tragic because that's what it's based its whole identity around. So it tries to cling on to what used to be, the world as it used to know it. That's just human nature, to hold on to, something that's breaking apart. And when it breaks down, it's really a dark night of the soul. It really is painful. That kind of pain is a portal, and a dark night of the soul is a portal. And I've gone through several myself, whether it's when I moved to New York City 10 years ago, and immediately after moving there, Hurricane Sandy hit the city and wiped out my apartment, and I was homeless and unemployed and ended up like stranded on this little island in the Caribbean without knowing what I was going to do next, without any money or a job. And like that was really scary. And I had to learn to lean into that uncertainty, and go through it. Instead of avoiding it or resisting it, you lean into the uncertainty, you go right through it. And the same has happened when, I've gotten fired from jobs that, I thought at the time that I needed that job for my survival. Right. So that's always really difficult to deal with. Or like, even leaving in a relationship is something similar, where it's like you can't imagine your life out without this person. And it's just happened in my life enough times where I can recognize the pattern, and I can feel the pain, and I know it's not easy, but I know that you emerge from that dark night of the soul, renewed and reborn. And I mean, the we're living in very interesting times. And right now, for me, the people that I know and have in my life and follow, who are the happiest right now, are the people that have had these times of transformation that required that there was some kind of a crisis that caused them to break apart their old identity and somehow, pick up the pieces to be born again. So I just, now I can see there's such a big reward in that. That doesn't mean it's not that doesn't mean it's easy. It still sucks to go through that kind of the portal of transformation, but it's so worth it. And that's what people often ask me, like, what gives me hope for the state of the world? Because I'm pretty much like perpetually optimistic, and I always choose to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that, as above, so below, as within, so without, the same way that we as individuals need to die to be reborn, I think we as a collective need to die to be reborn. So when I see this collective dark night of the soul, and it looks like the end, it looks like a death, and it is, but I choose to believe that, similar to what I've experienced in my own life, we as a collective need to go through this as a rite of passage and as an initiation in order to be reborn as a globe, as a world, as a collective humanity.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that you're saying this now, because I was literally about to ask you, like, I feel like the collective is currently experiencing a dark night of the soul. So I was going to ask you if you feel the same, and also just ask you, like, what your current thoughts are on where the collective is at right now and how the collective is awakening. I mean, I think it's pretty transparent that there has been a significant rise in like wellness and spirituality, and these topics are becoming more mainstream and popular. But I think also, at the same token, like, light and darkness and dualities in all life, like there's also a rise in spiritual warfare and illusion and bypassing. So let's expand a little bit on that, on the collective. What are your current thoughts?
Well, it's certainly an interesting time. Um, it's not quite as crazy and dramatic as it was like a year ago. And I'm not sure if that's like a temporary calm before the continued storm. I don't really know. I get a sense that things have already changed. So I don't know exactly what I mean by that. I feel like we're going through a big shift as a world. And I get the sense that the shift has already happened on a fundamental level. You mentioned spiritual warfare. I do think that, you know, the chaos and conflict happening on the earth does result from some type of, quote, spiritual warfare. What does that mean? I don't know. Again, I think it's a mistake to try to put too defined of terms on it. Are there good aliens fighting bad aliens, that are like trying to influence the earth? It's possible. Is it just, energy that's kind of, we're moving through? Could be that too. Is it just like the collective archetypes in the subconscious of humanity that are playing themselves out? That could be too. It's probably all of them to a degree, right? But I get the sense that the war is already over. We've already made the switch. But the problem is things take a lot longer to play themselves out um, in reality, right? So I think there's a lot that needs to change for this shift to be fully known and seen. I think we need new political systems. I think we need new economic systems. I think we need new energy systems. Like we need to renew a lot of the systems on Earth. They are fundamentally broken. And I get the sense that they're not only broken, no one's even pretending to try to fix them. When you look at politics around the world, I mean, I'm sorry, but it is laughable how much in how much of a disarray everything is in. There's no leadership. There's no true effort to restore any sense of balance and equity and love to the world. It's just beyond repair.
Mm-hmm.
So I really think that these systems are falling apart so that new ones can replace them. And so here's the thing, even though the shift has already happened on a fundamental level, a lot still needs to play itself out here on Earth. And that that might not be pretty. Like how do you replace a political system? How do you replace an economic system? I'm not sure, but you can't do that without a little bit of friction. So I do sense that there still needs to be a lot of major changes that need to be rolled out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And those major changes are going to come with friction, like all change does. But I think that it really is. I made a meme that I haven't posted yet where it's kind of like the Drake meme where the top one is being like, no. And the bottom one is being like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the top one is like, the world is ending. It's like, no. And the bottom one is, the simulation is getting an upgrade. And they're like, yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're getting an upgrade. Like we're reaching a new level of the video game. And here's the thing, we still live on Earth, we still live in 3D duality. So I don't think we're heading into a utopia. I don't think that that's part of what this universe is all about, right? I still think there's going to be good and bad. I just think it's a new level of the video game. You know what happens when you reach a new level of a video game? There's still bad guys, but they're new bad guys. It's like a different level. And also you might unlock new superpowers in yourself, or you might, unlock new weapons, or you might unlock new skills. And the scenery changes and it's a little bit cooler and it's new. So I think we're reaching a new level of the video game where we're going to have new skills, new talents, new economic systems. You know, I believe in cryptocurrency and things like that. But it's not going to be utopia. I think there's still going to be people that are, using greed as a motivation and things like that. But I do think that we're on the precipice of a pretty big change as a society.
Yeah. And when you mentioned like you sense that the shift has already taken place, immediately I thought, if the shift has already taken place, then we are currently in the process of integration, which is a lengthy
Right.
process as you expanded on.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to really step back and realize that what makes up the collective is us as individuals. Like we individually make up the collective. And so I think that part of the reason why we are witnessing a rise in spirituality and wellness and witnessing people around us and even ourselves experiencing awakenings and healing and shifts is because there is this collective consciousness, this collective shift and awakening taking place. It's like that awareness of like, you know, what is taking place in the external is a reflection of the internal.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is this responsibility of knowing that, like, for a collective shift to take place, it has to take place within ourselves.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think we all need to go through it to some degree.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are all kind of in it together. I think that nothing changes until we all change. Nothing can heal until we all heal. I definitely think it's definitely not even I'm so like bored with two-party politics. I'm just like so bored with it. Like our side is right, your side is wrong. No, our side is right, your side is wrong. Like get over it. I think that these are systems that are engineered to keep people divided. We need to let that go. We need to stop. The right hand needs to stop blaming the left hand for the body's sickness. Right? The left hand can't heal until the whole body heals, and that includes the right hand. Like we really are in it together, and we really need to stop like blaming people with different ideologies, because I think at the end of the day, there are our ideologies are not as disparate as it seems. They're um so I think we need to find ways to come together and to drop these artificial lines of division that are separating us. We're not as far apart. I think we're not understanding each other. Mm-hmm. It may look like, oh, the far right and the far left, and even in those cases, like what people want, they're not as far apart as people might, as the news makes it seem like they are.
Yeah. 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 And another thing that I want to expand on in regards to, the collective is, and the rise of spirituality, is the importance of discernment. Because, our healing journey and our spiritual journey is so vulnerable and is also so powerful at the same time. And it's important that we strengthen our discernment, you know, when there is a rise in like healers and spiritualists and diviners and all of these things, because we have to, yeah, just be very mindful and be practicing discernment as to where, you know, we're handing over our healing and our spiritual selves. And I want to, on that note, ask you like what you feel, because there could be so many misconceptions on what the true spiritual journey actually is. How would you define the true spiritual journey?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I definitely don't have the answer for what the true spiritual journey is. Actually, I don't know if you saw. I made a meme that I posted recently called "Spiritual Red Flags."
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
like
I saw it.
things to look out for.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually in the process of making one called "Spiritual Green Flags," which is things to look for in your own spiritual journey, or when looking for a spiritual teacher, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just read a couple of them. These are spiritual red flags. This quote, "I have transcended."
Yeah.
So it's kind of like this ego gratification of spirituality, where it's like, I have overcome the ego, I have transcended. I don't really think that transcending is part of the game. I don't know what that really means.
Mm-hmm.
That's like taking your own spiritual journey a little bit too seriously.
Right. And identifying with it, right? Being mindful of like you're still identifying with this identity that's part of like the ego self, which is separate from like the spiritual path. It's, yeah.
Totally. Or just like not having a sense of humor, judging people with different beliefs. You know, because again, when we fight over spiritual beliefs, I think in most cases we're fighting over metaphors. Like, oh, this God versus this God, or this concept versus this concept. You're fighting over stories. Like I think that like there is a spirit journey, which is just the journey of life. And anything beyond that is a story. So like what I don't get is when you read literature or look at art, listen to music, there's no like objectively right book. There's no objectively right song. You know, there are different songs for different moods, and different songs appeal to different people, but no one like believes, oh no, this is like the right song and every other song is wrong. So I think of like these stories that we build around spirituality are just, they're just mythology. They're just I think of them more like art than I do truth, right? um so I just think it's important to hold our beliefs, like to have a I love this phrase, fluid mind, steady heart. So the heart is steady, it's strong, it doesn't waver, the heart is firmly planted in its knowing, right? But the mind should be fluid. We shouldn't get too hung up on intellectual concepts, because the mind, on one hand, the mind is like one of the most amazing tools that we have access to, right? But on the other hand, the mind is also limited. Again, the Tao that can be named is not the true Tao, right? So any any concept that we hold on to intellectually too tightly, I just think that's where dogma comes from. So having a steady heart and a fluid mind, and then just I haven't this isn't even finished yet, but these are like just some of the spiritual green flag ideas for the meme that I'm gonna make. So a mind that's open, not dogmatic, doesn't take themselves too seriously, honors and respects the earth, teaches by example, respects the lineage of traditions, the ability to feel feelings and to be in touch with the body and emotions, not being detached and disconnected from the body or from
Mm-hmm.
feeling,
Mm-hmm.
um, and being of service to others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I did see the red flags, and I like that you're putting out a green flags one. And I just want to say, like, I love that. I love the spiritual memes that you create, because I think it brings forth this digestibility, if you will, to these spiritual concepts. And the steady heart makes me think of being grounded in the heart. And I feel called to ask you, like, what your relationship with your heart has been. Have you had to do a lot of healing surrounding your relationship with your heart? Or do you feel like you've always been pretty heart coherent and in tune?
Well, I think we're all born with a heart coherence, and but we're most of us grow up in a society that does not protect that heart. We live in a world that's very much intellectually driven and driven by the ego. So I definitely lost track of my own heart, just in the hustle and bustle of life and trying to advance in my career. And, at a certain point, the ego really takes control in most people's lives. And for me, I don't know when I first started to recognize this, but I definitely have been on a journey for the past several years to reconnect with the heart. And I think we all have as a society. I think that generally speaking, men have a harder time with kind of living from a heart-centric space. And luckily that's starting to change. At least here in Austin, there are so many conscious men and like men's healing circles and men's work coaches. And um so there's a lot happening to change that. But for me, yeah, it was, lots of, Kundalini yoga was a big game changer for me. Even experimenting with plant medicine, just changing even like the music I listen to, or the foods that I eat, like less coffee, more cacao, more music from that's coming from a place of like heart centricity, and just being able to sit with my own emotions and to feel them. And really now my creative process is so much more emotionally driven than it is intellectually driven. Like if I'm starting something from scratch, or I'm sitting down to create in the morning, the first step for me is just to tune into my body and to see how I'm feeling. Where am I at? What are my emotions trying to tell me? And just tuning into that, because I think that thought is secondary to emotion. Like emotions go deeper, and your emotional state, whether you know it or not, your emotional state is usually informing your thoughts. Like you might think something, but you might not have any idea that the way you're feeling is what is generating that specific thought form. So as people and as artists, when we actually can sink down into the level of the body, into the level of emotions, we're actually getting to the source of where ideas come from. So on the physical level, like that's where your intuition is felt. So as an artist, moving away from my head and getting more in touch with my heart has been everything, for my own creative process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, a lot of the times we hear of how our heart deceives us.
Mm.
And I feel like the heart in those cases gets such a bad rep, because I think when we think our heart is deceiving us, it's actually our mind that is deceiving us. And I think it touches on what you shared with us, that truth that our mind, body, and spirit are very interconnected. And I love you sharing with us how you first wake up, take that moment for yourself to ask yourself, to ground yourself in your body and tune in and ask yourself, what am I really feeling? Because I think a lot of us don't actually hold space for that, to just simply ask ourselves, what am I actually truly feeling? Because we've gotten so used to, when we ask each other, how are you? And it's like, oh, I'm good. But, when was the last time you've asked yourself, like, no, really, like, how are you? How are you feeling? How is your heart? How's your spirit? How's your body?
Yeah, and that's all. I think also emotion is what connects us. Like I really think that all there's like a collective emotional body that we all tap into.
Mm,
So in other words, like we might have different thoughts because the brain is very individual to us and our experiences. So we might think different things, but underneath those different thoughts is like a lot of shared emotions. Like I might
mm,
have thoughts that no one else will ever have, those specific thoughts. But when you talk about sadness or loneliness or love or joy or fear, these are things that everyone can relate to. So I really think like often I'll tap into my own body and emotions to see how I'm feeling. And then I'll write something down based on that observation. And then I post it, and everyone's like, how did you read my mind? Well, it's like, I didn't read your mind. I read my own body. And
mm,
that's where we're all connected. Like emotion is the connective tissue that ties us all together.
Which is why I feel like vulnerability is so powerful for that fact.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason why I just love having these kinds of conversations and like, being open and honest and sharing our stories and storytelling, because I feel like we feel seen when we are vulnerable with others. And I feel like the more vulnerable we are with each other, the more individual and collective healing we're going to be experiencing.
Yeah, vulnerability is key, like for everything, for like real relationships, for real creativity. Um, it's so important to put our true selves out into the world. And that's part of this transformation we're going through, right? And to leave the old identities behind, not to stop pretending to put out a certain version of ourselves into the world, but to allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to show our real selves to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a scary process, but it's like liberating on the other end to show up as fully yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, and I say this like with no shade, but I feel like some people have been so out of tune with their true selves that they'll hear us talking about something like this and be like, what do you mean becoming my true self? Like I am my true self. Like how would you translate that to someone who may not be understanding these conversations surrounding becoming your true self?
Well, it's a bit of a journey to even find out what that even means, right? And you kind of need to question a lot of the way things have been in your life. So, because if you don't even know how vast, the world is, you don't know that it's different from what you've experienced. You know what I mean? So, I just think it's so important for everyone to leave their comfort zone and explore and see how big the world actually is and how many different opinions and perspectives there are. Um, because if you never leave your hometown, for example, you're going to be like, this is just who I am, because in the context of your hometown, that is who you are. And that's all you really have ever needed to be. And that's fine. You can play it safe, stay in your comfort zone, be a good person, live a good life. And then, that's it. There's nothing wrong with that, to choose to live that way. But I think it's important to recognize that there can be more, but that requires that call to adventure that makes you step out of your comfort zone and start to explore. So, because then you can actually, that version of yourself you think you are is tested, and then you have to like self-reflect and examine, and that's how you grow, that's how you change, and that's how you become a bigger version of yourself. So it might not even be like you're not being yourself, but it's like you could be bigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when people ask me how do you find your passion? And something that I always share is like, you find it through exploration. You're not going to find without exploring, without allowing yourself to adventure out, which is, in direct correlation with what you're sharing with us. What is a recent comfort zone that you expanded out of?
I mean, so many. This past year or two has been like so many.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's something I've expanded into is
Mm.
being a teacher,
Mm.
because I was always comfortable, making art or whatever. But teaching art is a different story, and stepping into like a leadership role in whatever you do, that's a different approach. And I think it's so important for everyone to be teachers, because again, with the world changing, and I mentioned like in politics and whatnot, like there's very little authentic leadership in positions of power right now. So I think we all need to create, um we need to step into roles as leaders and as teachers in the absence of, leaders in our institutions. It's important for people who have that calling, or who have been on their own journey, of their own individual journey for however long, and they've figured a few things out on their own journey. Well, how can you teach those lessons to others in a humble way? So that's been a big learning curve for me over the past year, is teaching courses and hosting workshops and things like that, where I can actually not only create art but help others to create art on their own journey as well.
Mm-hmm. Has you stepping into the leadership role or like the teacher role brought out aspects in you that you hadn't seen before? And if yes, what have been those aspects?
What comes to mind is just strength. The ability to hold, I mean, the ability to hold space for others requires strength, and
Mm-hmm.
and patience and listening and empathy and compassion. um it's a move away from selfishness to selflessness. I mean, I don't have my own kids, but when, once you have kids, you're no longer living just for yourself, you're living for your children.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is part of what we need to do collectively, is stop living for ourselves and start living for each other,
Mm-hmm.
and return to that idea of community,
Yeah.
where we're doing things for the benefit of the whole instead of just for ourselves.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that, those qualities of you that have come out in being a teacher are rooted in you practicing those qualities with yourself. You holding space for yourself has allowed you to hold space for others. You bringing out the strength within yourself for yourself has allowed you to bring forth strength for others. You listening to yourself has allowed you to listen to others.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned earlier about, the kind of the integrity in a lot of the spiritual, you know, community or whatnot. And it's really important to, we can only teach what we've learned ourselves. We can only teach others what we have embodied ourselves. So it's so important, before trying to lead others, to make sure that we're walking that walk
Hmm.
and we're truly embodying it ourselves before we're trying to instruct others on their
Yeah.
own path.
Yeah. That is incredibly important. Is there an aspect of the spiritual journey that you feel doesn't get talked about enough?
It's well, in the age of social media, we're always celebrating the good side of things, the positive sunny side of things. And I guess it's important to acknowledge that that's not the whole journey, and getting into the you know the the darkness and the mud that you have to trek through, um and just the process of leaving behind your own illusions is, um it's not always pretty. So I think that's part of what I try to do with my own like memes and writing, is just to get into some of that, in terms of like the existential crisis that is a spiritual awakening. And you can't have a breakthrough unless you have a breakdown, right? So, and it's never ending either. I think that that's why I hate that idea of like, oh, I've transcended, because I think we're always in a place of becoming. And where I am today is hopefully not where I'm going to be tomorrow or next year. So I try to not ever have any sense of completion or I've arrived, because I really think that you're never arrived. I think you're always just in a different phases and stages and seasons of your life. And not all progress is linear. Sometimes you got to take a few steps back in order to take the next step forward. So it's okay to not, even if one day you have it all figured out, it's okay if the next day you don't have it all figured out, because it's life is a long and winding journey. And you're going to go up and down and sideways and backwards, and there's no real destination. It's about where you are and your state of presence at every phase of the journey.
Yeah, there is no uh, rebirth without the depths. And this might sound a little random, but when you said, we often highlight the sunny side of the journey, it kind of brought me back to the beginning of our conversation where we were honoring the sun. And it's like, where is the moon in the conversation?
Yeah.
Honoring the moon, where we talk about sunbathing, but we don't talk about moon bathing. And the sun is the sunny side of things, and the moon side of things is the darkness. That's why, when we talk about lunations and how full moons and it has her full light, that's when we feel the most emotional. That's when we feel naturally called to turn inward. So I just wanted to bring that little random reflection that kind of came up. There's a couple last things that I want to touch on really quickly. Your podcast is called Words Are Vibrations, and I love that title because it brings to perspective that words are energy. And I love that perspective of everything being energy because I think it just makes you more mindful. And that said, it makes you more mindful of the power of words, the power of language. And you are a writer, an author, a poet. Your words on your memes, impact so many people. So I feel like you understand, the impact of words. And I just want to expand on that a little bit, on your perspective on just the power of words.
Wow. I mean, I think language is so important. I think that language is in some sense the source code of reality. It's not just the words we speak and what we communicate. Language informs our ability to perceive reality. we can't fully understand something until we have the words to understand it. We cannot express something until we have the words to express it. Our entire concept of reality is based on what words we can apply to it. That's why we spell words. Words are literally a spell that are cast. And all words have their own sound vibration that echoes into the universe. So words will give you everything. Like you can use words to achieve anything in life. Like you show up at a job interview, the words that are uttered decide whether or not you get the job, right? You go on a date. Your words are going to determine like how that date goes. Like words are keys that can unlock portals. I mean, there's so much to this topic. Like Terence McKenna used to talk about a society can only evolve as much as the evolution of their language. And so I really think that poets are shamans to a degree, because what a shaman does is they use their extrasensual perception to actually feel the energy and to determine what needs to be kind of healed and clean and cleansed. And I think that poetry is similar, where like we kind of tune into the collective and identify where there's problems and use language as a way to resolve that problem. Like I think that words can be healing, they can be medicine. The same way that a president of a nation can stand up and use his words to declare war on another nation. That's the power of language. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of the role of the poet is to stand up and declare peace and make that declaration. And there's a historical authority to the voice of the poet, where a poet's words can transcend time, and they can live much longer than even the words of a president. So finding the right combination of words is the same thing as casting a spell, where you can use it as a magic spell to actually impact so much. So for me, words are really our vibrations.
Yeah. With everything you shared, there are two recommendations that I'd love to share with you. I recently watched this mini series with Brene Brown called Atlas of the Heart. Have you watched it?
No, I've seen a lot of Brene Brown stuff, but I haven't seen that particular series.
Okay, I highly recommend that you watch it, because she essentially is discussing what we're talking about in regards to words. She's talking about how important it is that we have the right words to describe how we're feeling. Because when we use the wrong words to describe how we're feeling, we are tuning ourselves into that state of being that it might be the wrong state of being. And she uses clips from movies to help define certain words. And so it's a beautiful series that I think you'll really enjoy. And the other recommendation I'd like to make is this book called Braiding Sweetgrass.
I know of it. I never read it, but I know it.
Yeah, I think you'll really love it. There's this one part in the book where she talks about language and how in the English language, it's majority made up of nouns, and how that's a reflection of how the English culture is materialistic. And in indigenous languages, it's majority adjectives. And so there's a lot revolving words and language in that book that I think, and
Cool.
the author is very poetic.
Yeah. Let me read this little thing that I wrote that I haven't made into a meme yet, but this is directly related to that topic. We speak reality into existence. There's a reason we spell words. Words literally cast a spell. Sounds are vibrations which impact the material world. Civilizations are built on myths, which are only stories. Words can be used to declare both war and independence. Whether we realize it or not, every day we are casting spells with our words. Everyone is a magician and a myth maker. Our ability to manipulate reality depends on our ability to intentionally cast spells. Choose your words wisely. They are more powerful than you think.
I love that. That was beautifully written and very clear and very true.
I will say this really quickly though too. I think that our language is evolving, and I think that memes are a part of that evolution because memes add the pictorial element back into the language. That's why memes are so immediate and direct, because you're not like reading it with the intellectual mind the same way you read a book. The image and the text combination hit you in a more visceral, immediate way. So I think that there's a potential for a more pictorial language. And you look at emojis that people use, and you look at memes that people share. I think we're starting to tap into a higher level of language that goes back to including a more of a pictorial element, the way that maybe the Egyptians used to have.
Yeah, I was going to bring up hieroglyphics, and that's a really interesting observation. Thank you for sharing that. And I remembered what I wanted to bring up, and that's very quickly just the importance of the music that we listen to and the lyrics that we recite. In the past couple of years, I've been experiencing, oh, I would say like more so 2020, 2021. I experienced a lot of cleansing, and I realized that I naturally started listening to music that didn't really have any words in it. And I'm sensing that I naturally was just cleansing myself and my consciousness from the kind of music that I was listening to. So I've been listening to so much jazz, so much classical music, and it has felt very purifying. And I just wanted to make that note of just like music impacts us not only because it's words, but because it's vibrations more than we know. So it's so important to be mindful of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I listen to all kinds of music, and I love the lyrical quality of music, but like in the morning when I'm writing, I definitely play instrumental music, or like I love the band Sigur Rós, and they're not instrumental, they have vocals, but the singer is singing a made up language. They're Icelandic, but they're not even singing, in Icelandic. He's singing in his own made up language that it's just expression and it's just tones and it's emotive. So you get this kind of, it almost sounds like an alien language because it sounds like the expression of the voice, but your mind doesn't get hung up on the actual words. So that's a great way to, or I even love the kirtan music of someone like Krishna Das, who is essentially chanting the Sanskrit names of God. So you're hearing the expression of the voice and the celebration of the divine, but you don't get hung up on the over intellectualization of the language.
I'll have to look into those. I'm curious now. Well, this conversation, I truly could speak with you for hours. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I thank you so much for your time and energy. And before we get into the final five, which are just some quick fill in the blank sentences for you. I just want to hold space if there's anything that you'd like to share.
I would just like to thank you for holding this presence and for um, making space for these conversations and showing up to do this podcast and to do everything you do. And I've really enjoyed our conversation as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Ready for the final five.
I'm ready.
It's just fill in the blank. It could be one word or more than one word. I am grateful to be.
Alive.
I am grateful to understand.
How little I actually know.
I am grateful to learn.
Something new every day.
I am grateful to begin.
I'm grateful to begin again and again and again.
That rhymed. I like that. I am grateful to release.
I'm grateful to release all that I no longer need.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, James. I'm excited to share this conversation. And yeah, just thank you for being you and for showing up the way you show up in the world. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.